Why are we being filmed?
I believe in data symmetry. So if you are recording me, I should have the right to record you. That only seems like appropriate. So I really think that's a very good way. Just like the rule of law, that things that apply to me should also apply to you. And if I write the law should apply to me as well. So data symmetry is a very good principle. My book starts with saying when everything is recorded. What does it mean to have privacy? So I think privacy is an illusion. So for me, the question is not to try to fight for privacy. That, ladies and gentlemen, we have lost, or we're just the wrong tree to bark up. The question I'm addressing is, what can you and what should you as individuals actually want in exchange for having given up your privacy? I think it is time to change the conversation and ask, what actually can we get out of it? What we want out of it? And hint, the answer goes beyond better ads. What is the value of data? The value of data is the decisions that data affects. So for me, the focus on the volume of data is a focus of the last century when storage was expensive. Now, the reason I'm writing down those 6 rights which we should have as citizens, as consumers, is that I believe we should not bark up the tree on saying, don't record this. Not a hopeful proposition. But we should have the same machinery, the same ways of, if somebody steals my bicycle, for instance, I don't know whether there are any bicycles probably all stolen here already, but when somebody steals here, your laptop, your phone in front of you, you have ways of saying, hey, if you don't give it back, you get penalized. You have to pay a fine, you get put in prison or whatever it is. The same I want to happen for data. That if a company uses the data for different purposes than what I understood they should be used for, that is something where the legal framework has to kick in. So a bit more specifically, let's take geolocation. And I think we should all have the right to determine on what granularity our data can be used, what spatial resolution they can be used. So let's take that example of Los Angeles International Airport. In some cases, I might be happy for somebody just to know that I landed LAX, but they don't exactly need to know which stall I'm using in the bathroom and for how long. On the other hand, in some other cases, if I, as I said, waiting at the wrong gate, then it's actually beneficial for me if they tell, hey, better move to the other gate. Or the most trivial example, if you order something by Domino's Pizza, you want that delivery person to know which room you're in that hotel. But maybe you don't want other people to know which room you're in. So, long story short, you should be in charge of the granularity, and I call that the right to blur. And if somebody violates this, then it is same machinery as if somebody reveals something about you which you don't want to read about you. Revenge porn example. What is a good question? A good question is a question that leads not to an answer, but that leads to a trade-off. That leads to your understanding that you need to make a decision. Do you want to have something more personalized? And that means that you are probably likely to get more and more narrow and narrower into some little world. Or do you want something less personalized, like the newspaper is not personalized, the one you buy at the street, where you get the shared symbols transmitted to you? That is called in machine learning exploration versus exploitation. So you explore, that means you see new things, things you never thought about before. You exploit, that means the things which we think work for you, you do more and more and more of that. Doesn't mean sexual exploitation of children, it just means you do more where you know there's something there. And that's a trade-off Other people cannot decide for you. So another of these rights I think we need to have is the right to set the knobs, to right to, in each of the cases where we want it, to put that trade-off at a value which we want, not a value some company or some government wants us to have. So if I feel of exploring new ways of getting to LAX, I might miss my flight, but hey, I might go to some really interesting neighborhoods. On the other hand, if I want to exploit and say find the fastest route, it's probably pretty boring, but it's probably pretty safe in that case. Exploration, exploitation. So I think government does play a role. I'm not particularly hopeful for the current one for that role, but in general, if companies misbehave, we have a system where that gets corrected. And the interesting discussion about what the purpose is of prisons, that's a different discussion here. So one is indeed bad behavior gets punished. But then we can take our business to those refineries who represent the values that we have, who give us what we want. So for some of you, it might be more important that it's really, really very, very secure how your data is sitting there, and you might be willing to do, for example, what's called two-factor authentication. Who of you likes that? Okay. All right, great. So there are 5 people who like that. So, but when you talk about liking things, most of you think it's a nuisance to actually have to, look at your mobile, your dongle. But it's more secure. So that's one of these trade-offs. Is the refinery you're working with, are they requiring two-factor authentication for the employees, or can anybody just look up your record? By the way, this might also be for this crowd to be the point to make the distinction between security and privacy. Security is that how likely is it that somebody can hack into the system? On the other hand, privacy is, I drove by yesterday when I went from USC to Manhattan Beach, there was an AT&T symbol. So I'm not sure whether AT&T has a big presence here or whether it was just one building. That was interesting because for them, they try to monetize your data big time. And how much of your privacy are you comfortable for them selling to somebody else? And my argument is that really the best way of monetizing your data, of selling them? Or could they maybe think about providing services for you which you would appreciate, like having cell phone, for instance, service in my hotel in Venice? That would have been a service I would have really appreciated. But they're rather thinking about selling my data. So how they monetize data, those are privacy issues versus how likely that somebody can break in, those are security issues. It's a distinction worth making. What is the equation of society? There, the Chinese are way ahead of us. They sat down 2 years ago and wrote down an equation for society which has to be fully implemented by 2020. So we're halfway there. And the purpose of an equation is to help better decisions. And better decisions means, first of all, we have scarce resources. For example, having a child to go to school. Like when you lived in Shanghai, there is only a finite number of really good schools, and there's fierce competition for people. There's this Hukou idea that if you are not Shanghai Hukou, it's actually almost impossible for you to find a good school for your child to go to. Everybody in China has a social credit score. And when I give in China, then talk in China, I typically ask everybody to take their mobile phones out and to tell me what their scores are. I ask them to stand up, and then I seat them down, less than 500, less than 600, less than 700. Then a few people remain standing. And then comes the discussion, how did you get there? And they know what the rules are. For example, You're jaywalking, -1 point. You're shoplifting, -5 points. You are selling counterfeit goods at Taobao, plus 100 points. Because that clearly is something which helps the company which makes the score, namely Ant Financial. So that's what you want. So they understand what to do, and they understand what the ramifications are. For instance, if your score is above a certain level, you can go through the VIP lane at Beijing Capital Airport. So that already is interesting, and it's interesting how that influences behavior. In general, publishing the criteria is very important. Otherwise, what you have is you have one of the key ingredients of totalitarian regimes, which is that everybody does something illegal. So if they want to go after you, they find something. Here's a question. Do you think that Facebook, for instance, which I think is the de facto identity company in the West, that Facebook should be responsible for identifying people? And if you think about it, even nowadays, children, before they are born, they come preloaded with data. The mother showing a picture of the child, the sonogram, and so on and so forth. So, somehow, it's an illusion to think that the child is in charge of the data. So we have the data. Do we acknowledge it and say, what should we do with children? Or do we live in that bubble and think, oh, we don't want to see that we have our data? Closing your eyes doesn't mean that things are not happening in the real world. And in closing, we want to talk about algorithms and what can go wrong. Why did a vibrator show up at Amazon's homepage on Mother's Day? Well, it was a wonderful example of an algorithm that we started it with saying, well, what are potential items people could want to buy for Mother's Day? Thousands and thousands of them. And then we see, what do people click on? And some people click on the coffee maker, other people click on the socks. But what? A vibrator for Mother's Day. Most people click on the vibrator. And then that algorithm, what it does, whatever people seem to be most interested in, that's what bubbles up, and you wouldn't believe how fast that vibrator bubbled up. And so there it was on the front page, and of course, time for the New York Times, bring it back to your laundry basket. Time for the New York Times to take a screenshot and call up the chief scientist and saying, we see that you are recommending vibrators for Mother's Day. What's behind that? And all I could say, it is just the data. Thank you very much.